Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our third installment of Coffee and Something Stronger, a coffee chat show where I sit down with theologians, academics, practitioners from across the Southeast and talk about all things at the intersection of theology, environmental justice, and the climate movement. This morning, I am lucky enough to be joined by a very good friend, Reverend Michael Malcolm, who is the director of Alabama Interfaith Power and Light and also of the People's Justice Council. We work together in his capacity as a pastor in Georgia, in his role with Interfaith Power and Light across the Southeast, and also in some of our national networks with the Southern Climate and Energy Network and the U.S. Climate Action Network. And I will pass it over to Michael. Thank you for being here this morning. If you want to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Yeah, thank you, Cody, and Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. Thank you to Reverend Kate Mosley as well. Thank you all for being with us. I'm grateful to be here. I'm Michael Malcolm. I am the Executive Director of Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, also the founder and Executive Director of the People's Justice Council. And I got here by way of listening at Reverend Kate Mosley and Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley doing a conference. And during this conference, Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley made the statement. He said, "How can I preach to them in the pulpit, shout them in my pews, and they can't breathe out in public?" And that right there gave me a clear indication of what I should be doing as a Christian minister in this work. And so I've been running ever since.
That's perfect. And I think you have a reading to open us up with this morning. Is that right?
Yes, I sure do. I wanted to read one of my favorite poems. It actually comes from a theologian called by the name of Martin Omler. He was priest or pastor during the time of the Holocaust. And so he wrote this poem, and it says, "First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me." This is my reading. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. What about that reading speaks to you? Why do you think it's important for this conversation?
Yeah, so this particular reading for me and helps to guide my life, actually. It tells me in no uncertain terms to speak up for the least of these. It tells me to speak out for those who are on the outsides of the margin and who are often marginalized and underserved in our communities. Because just as they are, I could be, and at some point I will be, and I'll need them to help me fight just as well as they need me to help them fight now.
I would go ahead and dive into it with you. Last week, I was talking to Hunt Priest about a similar thing about how, theologically, you can either kind of talk about creation care as it manifests through nature and scripture, or you can also talk about it in the way that it's rooted in our care for neighbor. And I wonder, since you just talked about that, if you would talk a little bit about, theologically, where do you go to back that up? Where do you find your sources for that? And how do you talk about it in the pulpit and with the people of Alabama?
Yeah, so it was actually two things that calls for me. And one is taken out of the Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures. And that is, "Thou shalt not kill." Right there for me, that's a full stop and lets me know that if I'm to follow God, then I am to preserve life. The second thing that stands out for me is in the New Testament, when Jesus gives the parable of the neighbor going to his neighbor's house and knocking on the door at midnight. And because of the amount of dedication he had to feeding his family, he wouldn't stop knocking. And even when the host told him to go away, because his children were sleeping, being inconvenienced, he still wouldn't stop knocking. And then it follows up to say that if you knock, the doors will be open. And so in that, I see a progression that I'm not supposed to stop when it comes down to spreading a gospel of justice and a gospel of compassion and a gospel of peace and a gospel of mercy and equity. This gospel of inclusion. I'm not supposed to stop. I'm supposed to stay consistent, but I'm also supposed to answer to the needs of those, the immediate needs of those. And when I look at environmental justice, I look at brothers and sisters in our community who are suffering under direct pollution from industrial pollution, oftentimes from fossil fuel and coal ash, and these things are things that we can actually control, but nobody's speaking out against them. And so for me, again, it goes back to what Reverend Durley said. Can I inconvenience myself to inconvenience others? Because the people that I actually serve are suffering. And the people that I know and the people that I've grown up with, and to be honest with you, my growing up and my upbringing was filled with contamination. And so to be a part of that, to experience that, and to know that there are still those that are suffering from it. One, I've got to speak out on preserving life. But two, when I do start speaking out, I can't stop just because somebody else is inconvenienced. I've got to keep on knocking.
Yeah, that's good. When you talk about rooting it in the thou shalt not kill thing, and all these communities that are suffering, and often those communities are ones that are not seen, and that I often say that the systems designed to harm those people are intentionally obscure and hidden. And so I wonder, in your work, how do you help people see the connections between thou shalt not kill and environmental justice and what's going on?
Yeah. So for me, it's about the practical imagery and the experiential knowledge. For me, it's about raising up the voices of those who are on the margins. It's about showing people, not just telling them about it, but showing them the experiences that people live through. In fact, let's even look at it now and look at the experiences of people even now while we're dealing with this COVID. People, those of us who don't necessarily live in housing, in communities where there's a great deal of contamination or disturbance of any kind. No, whether it's slow violence or it's loud violence, we don't have to necessarily suffer from that. So we come in, we go in our houses and shut our doors, and we kind of forget about the rest of the world because in our homes we're at peace. But the reality is there's some people who had to go in their houses and shut their doors that not only have to worry about how they're going to eat because they're now laid off of work, but while they're in their houses, they have to deal with the constant pollution that fills their houses because our EPA is rolled back and sat down and tucked its tail and hid under a rock right now when we need them the most. They sat back and allowed for industry to continue on, and in fact can even increase what they're doing because they're no longer regulated during this pandemic. Those who sit in those homes are still suffering and even suffering even more, and nobody's actually talking about that.
Yeah, I was going to ask at some point, what injustices have you seen that are even further perpetuated by COVID, and what has sort of bubbled up to the surface that maybe wasn't there before?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we see the health disparities. We've seen the economic disparities because most of our service workers look like me. So we've seen that. But here's one thing, Cody, that I don't think anybody's really paying a whole lot of attention to. The fact that there was no real moratorium on utility shutoffs. It's just a matter of time before utilities are weaponized to force people back out into unsafe conditions. Yeah. And unless we answer that question or deal with that problem proactively, we're going to be reacting to not only a health pandemic, but an economic collapse as well, if we don't deal with that issue. But the only way we deal with that issue is we as the people have got to collectively come together and demand that our government takes care of us versus taking care of industry.
Right, that's good. I want to talk a little bit about advocacy later, but I don't want to miss out on your United Church of Christ place in the world. And I wanted to ask, I've asked everybody that's come on about their tradition, and to ask, does being United Church of Christ give you any unique tools or framings when dealing with climate change or environmental justice? How does that tradition well up in you?
So I actually swell up with pride when I talk about being United Church of Christ. And my reason for that is because of the stance that the United Church of Christ has taken when it's come down to environmental justice. They were at the forefront. It was the United Church of Christ that produced the first toxic waste and race report that Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis coined the phrase environmental racism upon. And so to come from that tradition and to be a part of that tradition and to still have access to some of those legends, such as Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis. I mean, again, I swell up with pride and know that I'm in the right place.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more about how the UCC has incorporated some of those things? I know they have a dedication to environmental justice. They have the report you just mentioned. They also have a divestment strategy, I think, that their congregations are going through. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I can speak briefly to the divestment strategy. I'm not as on the ground with that in this present moment. In fact, we just produced another report that we're pushing, and I'm more closely tied with that. But with the divestments, the UCC took one, again, being in the forefront. Being trailblazers, we were one of the first ones to start a program and start looking at divesting from fossil fuel industry and taking the lead on divesting from fossil fuel industry, and to collectively look at it as far as the entirety of the Church Universal. Collectively, it's reported that it's something around 12 billion, I believe it is, that has been totally divested from at this point. But I'd like to take it just a step further. And I know you don't want me to jump on advocacy yet, but I am currently advocating, not only do we need to divest, but we need to look at how we reinvest and putting communities first and leading the way, as we've led the way with divesting, lead the way into some community solutions with that divestment money. And start looking at some real sustainable, energy efficient, affordable housing, solar projects, wind projects, just really taking the forefront to let people know, be an example, and let our governmental structure know that this is the way that we want things done and this is the way that we want to live. And we advocate for those things as well.
Yeah, that's great. I'll say for people who are tuning in, move your money, divest, get your congregation to move their money, the school to move the money, for you to move your money. We spend a lot of time working against ourselves because we're not looking at the systems that we're invested in. And so please do that. That's a really good point, Michael. And I like that you take that and you also challenge us to be a bit more active in that. Not only divest, but reinvest strategically in communities and resources.
Yeah. The only reason that fossil fuel wins is because they have money. Money in our society wields power, and that's if we collectively come together, pool our money together, we can wield a mighty blow for the planet and for people.
Yeah. Well, that's a good transition because I want to talk about people power a little bit and
All
something that
right.
we work on together a lot. I first want to start with your framing about environmental justice. Now, I could be misquoting you slightly on here, but you've said this a couple of times and it sticks with me, that you've often said there can be no real work on climate change or climate justice without environmental justice being the center of that movement. And I wonder if you talk a little bit about that, why you think that's important, how you got there.
Yeah. So, Cody, when I came into this movement, which wasn't that long ago, actually, when I came into this movement, I heard a lot of people talking about creation care, and they equated it to plant life, they equated it to animal life, to aquatic life, they equated it to the planet. And that was just this ignoring of people who live on this planet. And for me, I couldn't get past the people. And I saw the connection. If you help the people, you'll heal the planet. If you can clear up what ails the people, which is the pollution from industry, then you can heal the planet. They're all connected, but we tend to ignore the people and chase the planet, and that equation is out of balance, is out of whack. If we are to care for all of creation, then we ought to care for all of creation. And that also includes people. But to be honest with you, that's the hard work. Now, I can go into that some more if you want me to.
Yeah, you're here.
But I don't, okay.
Go ahead.
I just want to make sure I'm in the right place.
I'll stop you when I'm ready.
Well, let me digress for a second, or pause parenthetically here and say that Cody and Gipple and I have a long-standing relationship since I've been in the movement. I've been working with Gipple, and they are my family. And so, if you hear us joking around, please know that this is just us having a good time and having good conversation. But going back to it, I have a theory. And my theory is this: the reason why we ignore people and we chase after the planet is because we don't necessarily see the people that pollution hurts. Because they are Black, they are brown, they are poor, they are indigenous. Because they don't necessarily contribute a whole lot in terms of resources to the capitalist system, we often ignore them. The system ignores them, and we as people ignore them. And the sad part about it, Cody, is we as people of faith ignore them. But the reality is, in order for us to win, we can no longer ignore them. The reason why COVID is as bad as it is because we've ignored them. The reason why we're dealing with the climate crisis and it's as bad as it is because we've ignored them. Had we dealt with the human right aspect of pollution and dealt with disproportionate or legally unwanted land use and its fairness, we wouldn't have this issue. Our greed overrode our compassion.
You know, your focus on people is really interesting because, you know, a lot of times one of the correctives to thinking about creation care theology is that for a long time, Christian theology has been too anthropocentric. That's what's allowed us to dominate the environment. And I feel like you actually take that quite a different way, that it's focused on people, but in a very particular kind of justice way. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but.
Yeah, so I simply follow the gospel. If I look at Jesus and look at the life of Jesus and I follow the ways of Jesus, I cannot help but to look at people from the aspect of we are community.
Yeah.
But it also causes me to look at the planet and the system, or the ecological system, to say we are part of the ecological system, not lords over it, but a part of it. And in fact, servants of it. And that puts me in a different place. Because I'm not looking at people as to say, what can I get out of them? They're no longer a commodity at that point. When I've changed my perspective, people aren't a commodity. People are there for me to serve, to live peacefully with.
Yeah, that's great. We've talked about people, talked about silence communities. Can you talk about the importance of grassroots organizing and building power from the grassroots, and how that's also a spiritual practice for you?
Yeah, so the People's Justice Council, I started the People's Justice Council as a way of speaking to community. And what the People's Justice Council does is it provides tools and access to community to build power from the grassroots up to fight for change at a policy level. And my reason for this is because top-down models of movement have never worked. Any movement that's been lasting, any movement that has been impactful has always started from the bottom. It might have been supported from the top, but it started from the bottom. It started from the complaints of the people. Even in scripture, and in the book of Exodus, when Moses goes before God, God tells Moses to tell the people, I've seen what you're going through. I've heard your cry. Now I'm going to do something about it. And for me, grassroots organizing is about dealing with the complaints of the people and allowing those people who are complaining to lead the way to their solutions. Let me put it even more practical and make it individualized. Cody, there's nowhere in the world you gonna tell me, come to my house, come in my house, and tell me how I need to order my house.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. If you tried, it'll be bad for you, and it'll end bad in the sight of God. And that's just the reality of it, because that's my house. If something breaks in my house, I can tell you what breaks and what needs to be replaced or what needs to be fixed. Now you come to my house and my AC isn't working. You say, well, you need to change the filters. You need to change this. You need to do that. And I'm saying, I've already done all that. It's not working. You need to replace my AC unit. Eventually, I'm going to get upset with you because you keep trying to tell me to do something that I clearly know doesn't work.
Right.
And so we have some bad communication. And that's what happens in community a lot of times, because we have this top-down order model of leadership. Oftentimes they miss the community because they're trying to shoot solutions at the wrong thing.
Yeah.
If you would just listen at people on the community level and allow them to lead you in the solution, you'd be able to get the problem.
Yeah.
You can take your expertise and put it on the problems that they have because they've actually told you what the problem is.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. Congregations, faith leaders, green teams, practitioners of climate justice in different ways who want to engage in this work and do it well, and they want to figure out how to do grassroots organizing well, listen well. What are some of the things that they can practically be doing? How should they enter into those conversations in those communities?
Well, I'm glad you asked this, and you're gonna love me for this answer right here, Cody. Put your cup down so you don't spit all over your screen. Talk to your IPLs, man. If you want to know how to get involved with people that's already doing the work. You don't have to create anything new. You can support them where they are. And it can be an extension of your ministry. I was having a conversation with some church leaders in the Black community, and these brothers that I was having this conversation with actually run some pretty nice size, significantly sized churches. And so right now with COVID, they are having an issue with ensuring that the churches stay intact and that, funds are there, because in a real sense, they have metrics to meet and have to be able to pay the bills and whatnot. And so we're having this conversation, and all I could see was them continuing to circle around this old model. And they just kept going back to this old model. We gather on Sundays in the four walls of our sanctuary, and we have service, and we let you loose, and you go on about your life until we come back together again. And this is the old model of worship, and people are right now hurting because of they can't get back to this old model. And I had to stop and say, hold on, are you all really paying attention to what's being said? Because COVID has clearly told you that you've got to look at a different way of going about things. And if you continue to try to chase this old model, you're only putting people in harm's way. But because of our addiction to the old model, it stops us from looking at and being innovative about new things. And so I have to warn people, even as I'm talking to you, let's stop looking at these old models of helping. Look at some new models of helping. And there are some people and what would happen if a community of faith would adopt a nonprofit that's doing community work, to say, we will fully support you financially. We will also provide a pool of volunteers for you to help build out your nonprofit, and we'll work together, and we'll change this community together. Oftentimes you'll have the church setting up this program, you got a nonprofit setting up this program, you got this one doing this program, and everybody's operating in their own silos.
Yeah.
We can't build power together that way. We seem divided. But if we collectively came together, pooled our resources, then we'd be able to wield enough power to change our community, thereby changing our society.
Yeah. You talk about the old models reminds me of, in grassroots organizing, especially in just activism generally, one of the best things that we have, we may not have all the money, we're still trying to get all the people. What we can do is be as creative as possible to explore these new solutions. And so I'm wondering if you'd speak a little bit more to, why do you think creativity is important? How do you think it's important? How's it being used when it's used well?
Yeah. Excuse me. Again, it goes back to those old models. Me and you having this conversation, other people just listening in, but you my homeboy. So me and you just gonna have this conversation, Cody. Cody, I've recently went on sabbatical from pastoral ministry, and I've said I'll take a year sabbatical, and after that, I'll reassess if I want to go back and do pulpit ministry again. Cody, since I've been gone from doing pastoral ministry, I am feeling 100% relieved. And the reason being is because I got to the point where I got sick of church. And I got sick of church because the church wasn't doing anything. And the reality is, unless we change, there are going to be more people that feel like me than not. And the church isn't attractive when the church is busy trying to chase to see who can build the most people on Zoom and who can get their online programming right and pack as many people in the church safely as possible. And all of this stuff while people are sitting up there in their houses and mentally they having breaks because they're not used to being in the house that long. Or they're sitting in the houses and they got pollution all around them and they having to deal with this toxicity. Or they've been dealing with domestic violence the whole time while you've been in church and you've been ignoring all the signs. And now they're sitting in the house with their abuser. In essence, what I'm saying is, instead of us continuing to hold on to the old models of looking inside the four walls. Let's look at the old model of Jesus when Jesus went out into the hedges and the byways and compelled men and women.
Hmm.
Get out of the four walls, quit being married to the four walls, and get out in the streets and help your people because they need help.
I was going to ask, as a minister, what are good ways that ministers can lead their congregations in the tenets of environmental justice and ensure that they have this eye towards the community? And maybe that's it. Maybe it is just getting outside the walls and doing some listening and some looking.
Yeah.
But if you have anything else to say to that, I welcome that too.
I agree with, yeah, absolutely. But let's, me and you can have this conversation because we're both in the Southeast. We both deal with the same utilities. Cody, that's one of the most prevalent and pertinent things that a congregation can be dealing with right now, is advocating for their congregations to still have lights and still have water and not have to rely on going back to work.
Yeah.
Because, and going in unsafe conditions, because their stuff is going to get turned off and they can't live in the homes that they occupy.
Right. You talk about the Southeast, and you've been a minister in Georgia. You've worked in the environmental community in South Carolina. You're now in Alabama, and you obviously have all these networks that we share together. From your perspective, what do you see as some of the major challenges that the Southeast is facing that's particular to the rest of the nation and other parts of the world?
Yeah, so again, the utilities is one thing. We have our public service commissioners, commission. Some people call it Public Utilities Commission. That is one of our darkest places, to be honest with you, in our governmental systems in the Southeast, because that's who controls or regulates your utilities. But oftentimes, your Public Service Commission doesn't have the public's interest at heart. Instead, they have profit, and they have the public utilities at heart. And instead of being the public service, they're public utility managers. And the saddest part is they are, for most of us, elected officials. We can do something about that, and we can do something about that right away. And I think that is something practically that we could rally around. One of the things that the People's Justice Council is doing right now is organizing, energizing democracy in the South. And with that, we want to deal with every state in the South and deal with the fact that of the unjust energy burdens that people have to deal with because of unfair rates, the lack of choice in energy sources that we have to deal with, the pollution that's caused by it, and the effects that has on climate instability, as well as the fact that our democracy in the South isn't a democracy at all. And deal with the fact that we need transparency in our public utilities.
Yeah. I don't want to leave that conversation without also talking about, we have a shared problem with our utilities in the way that it disposes of coal ash waste, which for those of you who are watching who aren't familiar, coal-fired power plants have coal ash waste that is scooped out, has traditionally been stored in unlined ponds, and those ponds are across Georgia, leaching into groundwater. Those ponds also exist in Alabama, and in some cases, I know that you've been dealing with coal ash in North Birmingham, and I wonder if you'd say a word about that to let people know what's also going on the other side of the state line.
Yeah, so again, as Cody has said, one of the things that often happens within the states in the South is that our waste just gets moved from one state to the other. Right now, Alabama has 3 times the amount of waste than New York City, with less than 3 times the amount of people. One of the things that is a waste product in Alabama is coal ash. And unfortunately, in particular in North Birmingham, because I've spent some time in North Birmingham with the people in North Birmingham, it's not just that there's coal ash waste in North Birmingham, Cody, but because of these coal-firing power plants, it's in the open. And they literally dispose of this stuff openly without covering it up or anything. And when the wind blows, it goes throughout these people's community. It saturates their homes. It saturates not only externally, but internally as well. People in North Birmingham have disproportionate health impacts because of this. Rare forms of cancer, mental instability, asthma at all-time highs. One of the worst places in the world, in the whole of United States to raise your kids. The school that they shut down because of the coal ash, they moved it and rebuilt it on contaminated soil, opened it back up and had to close it back down again. These are egregious. This is egregious disrespect to an entire community.
This moves back to what you were saying. I mean, this is the link, right, between thou shalt not kill and policy and systems that perpetuate death of particular communities on purpose.
Yes.
The system is designed to do that. And so that is sort of the reason why I think it is congregation's responsibility. It is, in order to live out your calling correctly, I think you have to be engaged in these systems. You have to be dealing with the systems that we're all culpable in. We're all using energy, and that waste is being disposed of improperly and affecting these communities. So I think that's quite right. We're getting near the end of our conversation. I want to ask you, we were talking before we went live, we talked a little bit about James Baldwin, and we're just having some conversation about that. Someone that we both appreciate a lot. And we were talking about James Baldwin as a prophet, and that got me to thinking, what do you think it means to be prophetic in these times? As faith leaders, as people who are doing environmental work, what does it mean to be prophetic?
So for me, I learned during my seminary time, as well as my undergrad, that being a prophet is not foretelling, it's forthtelling, or it involves forthtelling. And even when you foretell something, you foretell based on what you see. James Baldwin did that. James Baldwin spoke about the problem with with Black America and white America, and he talked about the discrepancies in race relations. He talked about the mentality and the rage that Black men or Black people, in America have to deal with just because of being conscious of who they are and knowing that they're hated just because of who they are. And he wasn't afraid to actually say this out loud to anybody, and it didn't matter if it made you uncomfortable. And he foretold of the conditions that we see today because of this divide. We are feeling the impacts. COVID is not just a dis-ease, a virus that creates a dis-ease in our bodies. It has been a virus that has showed a dis-ease in our society. Because of the things that Baldwin talked about that we've still ignored and are still ignoring today. Everybody dealing with the health impacts, and everybody dealing with the lack of ventilators and masks and PPE. But at the same time, you need to deal with the circumstances that creates the impacts that Black folk are dealing with. Let's deal with that. Let's deal with why there's these respiratory issues, preconditioned respiratory issues that are only exacerbated because of COVID.
Right.
You know, why does that exist? It ain't because people living unhealthy. No, it's because they live in bad environments that weren't created by them.
Well, it ties in really well with, talking about environmental racism, which we've touched on a
Right.
little bit here in talking about environmental justice. But there are, exactly what you're saying. There are communities that are intentionally set up to fail, that it would be hard pressed to live a healthy life in those areas because they put a bunch of pollution there.
Yeah.
So then when you layer another thing on top of it, it just exacerbates the problem that was already there, the system that already created that.
Yeah. And people with diabetes, and again, that has majority affected Black folk. But even in that, you go to North Birmingham, and you'll see there's fast food places around. There are no fresh food sources. You don't have groceries.
Yeah.
And in fact, because of the pollution, you can't even grow your own food.
Yeah.
It's against the health and advisory for you to grow your own food in that community. What are they supposed to do?
We talk about it in terms of energy sometimes here, especially in Atlanta, that there are communities that are sacrificed because they're put in a position where they are reaping the detriments of pollution to produce energy. And because of energy burden, they can't even afford that energy.
Yep.
So they can't afford it. They can't breathe the air. They can't, those layers I think are really important. And I'm reminded, I'll try to close this out, but I'm tempted to be a little preacher-esque and
go ahead, preach then, Red.
Just say that maybe what it means to be prophetic. With those who have eyes, let them see, and with those who have ears, let them hear, that what these communities are experiencing, what you're saying, to be watchful, to be mindful. I want to close with asking two questions that I've asked everybody, very short, about your personal experience and how you're processing COVID. The first one is, what are you missing the most in your life because of COVID-19? And then what are you clinging to that gives you hope in these days?
So I'll be honest with you, I'm missing being around you all. And by you all, I mean my community, my environmentalists, my EJ warriors. I get joy from our laughter and hanging together. And so I'm really missing our personal touch. And the other question, what was the other question again?
What gives you hope? What's kind of bringing you through?
The thing that gives me hope is that we are seeing outright all of the disparities that we have in our civil society. And we have an opportunity to correct the things that we see if we don't ignore it.
Yeah.
My job is to make sure that I sound the trumpet so we don't ignore it.
Yeah. Well, I'll close with a reading from a friend and author, Caitlin Curtis, who this reading is going to come out of her first book, Glory Happening. She is a Native American author and a Christian that kind of writes at that intersection, a member of the Potawatomi Nation. And so this comes out of the first part of that book. It says, "O God, call us into the good work, and when we are unable, push us into the sunlight and let us see your face. Hydrate our souls with the kind power of your mystery. There we will understand. There we will not be afraid, because there the darkness is only a fraud." Amen.
Amen.
Everyone, please join us next week, same time, same place, for Coffee and Something Stronger. I'll be bringing on Senior Rabbi Lawrence Rosenthal from AA Synagogue to talk to us about some of these same themes, and we'll see you then. Thanks so much.